hazard, not just the safety element, but also the ability for us to get back up and running as a city quickly after a large earthquake. So we made some great progress. Lots of great data was gathered, but then unfortunately, the ad hoc committee progress died. And so let's pick it up and try to complete it and put forward some recommendations to the city council. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll close item 4, public comments and non-agenda. Before we get started, though, I'm remiss in not doing our pledge. So if everybody could stand and face the screen with the flag, we'll do the pledge out of order, I recognize. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So with that, we'll get on to our meeting overview. And I'm inviting our Community Development Director, Netta Zayer, to kick us off.
Thank you, Mayor Stevenson, council members, planning commissioners. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here tonight, as well as the members of the public who've joined us. Tonight, we have 3 topics we'd love to cover with the City Council and the Planning Commission. The first topic being the work that's been done to date on our safety element update that we are currently underway with. The second topic would be the environmental justice element. That will be the middle segment of the study session. And then lastly, staff will give a brief update on state housing laws, as well as what that means for Burlingame and what we should do to prepare ourselves for that. We are joined this evening with the consultants that are working with us on the safety element and the environmental justice element. PlaceWorks is the lead consultants on this, and Eli and Lauren are here. I'll let them introduce themselves further and kick us off with the safety element update.
Good evening, commission members, council members. Eli Crispy with PlaceWorks. I apologize in advance for my voice. I hope we can get through this before it goes completely. And yes, we're going to give you a brief update on the safety element work and then move on to the update on the environmental justice component. So next slide, please. And I'm joined by Lauren Willie, who's another member of our project team. And we are, of course, not the entire project team. There is a much larger group that is supporting this effort. Not only ourselves at PlaceWorks, but we are also supported by a number of sub-consultants, including Nexus Planning and Research, Atlas Planning Solutions, and our local community-based organization partner, CRC. So a safety element, as you may well know, is a mandatory component of the City of Burlingame's general plan. And as the name suggests, it identifies the both natural and human caused hazards that are present in the community and contains policies and information to help build a more resilient community to better protect against these hazards. The safety element update that we are doing is part of a larger program that we've dubbed the Peninsula Resilience Planning Effort, or PREP. It is a joint effort of 9 communities in San Mateo County, the county, and then 8 incorporated communities. And the idea is that by working together and updating these safety elements for these 9 communities all at once, we can share the same basic information, we can coordinate community engagement efforts such as this, and we can make sure that the policies that are in these joint safety elements are, while they will be tailored to every individual community, that they do work together with your neighbors and surrounding agencies so that everyone has a bit more of a unified policy framework to build more resiliency. And as part of this, we are incorporating the recent local hazard mitigation plan, which is a countywide effort that was last done in 2021, another unified effort that can carry forward a lot of the work that we're doing for the safety element. And I should also add that even though they are not necessarily a full and active participant, that we are working closely with One Shoreline and CCAG through their One Watershed effort. They're a big, if you will, technical advisor and have informed a lot of the work that we're going to be presenting in the safety element. So as I mentioned, the advantage of doing this regional approach allows us to have common sources of data, common information, common studies that we are using to make sure everybody is on the same footing. And it allows us to have these common community engagement efforts. The community engagement is a big part of this project. We do really want to make sure that these safety elements are reflecting the goals and values and priorities of the community members. There are also a number of state laws that have recently triggered this sort of update. The state in the past several years has expanded the requirements for safety elements. So part of the motivation for this update is to make sure that the city of Burlingame's safety element is in compliance with all of these state laws. These are some of the more prominent ones. Senate Bill 1241, which is, I believe, about 12 years old at this point, requires that there be information in the safety element around wildfires and more specific policies and language to help protect new development against wildfires. Senate Bill 379 is perhaps the most transformative of these. It requires that the safety element include a vulnerability assessment to identify the challenges posed by changing climate hazards as a result of climate change, and to include policies to protect against the threat of climate change. We'll be discussing that results a bit more later on. There's also Senate Bill 2140, which allows us to incorporate the local hazard mitigation plan into the safety element. That potentially makes the city eligible for greater disaster relief funding should that become necessary. And then more recently, Senate Bill 99 requires that the safety element identify evacuation constrained residential areas, building off of some of the lessons learned from evacuations and wildfires in recent years. That and some other evacuation related policies are being covered as part of the county-wide all hazards evacuation plan, which is a parallel effort being led by the county's Department of Emergency Management. But we are going to incorporate those results and that feedback into Burlingame safety element as best as we can. So beyond just complying with state law, we do want to identify that the update to the safety element is meant to benefit the community in a number of different ways. First and foremost, of course, to better protect the community, to make sure that all people, all property, all assets, all infrastructure in the community are safer and less likely to be harmed by wildfire, flood, landslide, a number of other different hazard conditions. We also want to make sure we're building that long-term resilience. We know that many of these hazards are getting worse as a result of climate change. The scope and magnitude of disasters that we experienced 30 years ago is not the same as what we experience now. And it may very well not be the same that we experience 30 years down the road. So we want to make sure we are laying the framework for those changes now so that we are proactively addressing what we are fairly sure is coming down the road. I mentioned the importance of the regional coordination, making sure that Burlingame works in partnership with surrounding communities to work together on joint efforts such as shoreline protection and protecting against sea level rise. Burlingame cannot wall itself off. We need to work with surrounding agencies. And also, although it is not a direct focus of the safety element, we are also using this opportunity to try and update and better sync up with the city's emergency preparedness efforts, which includes evacuations and emergency alerts. We are also doing this, recognizing that this is not occurring in a vacuum. The city's already done quite a bit of work around emergency issues. The climate action plan, then, although it is more focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that is still part of climate change. These are related matters, so we are syncing up with that effort from 2019. As I mentioned, the local hazard mitigation plan from 2021, we are incorporating some of the actions in that hazard mitigation plan into the safety element and making sure that the safety element is working in partnership with that. We are also making sure that the safety element is connected with some of the other components of the general plan, the land use element, the housing element, the circulation element. All of these contain policies and topics that are relevant to ensuring a safe and resilient community. And then, as we will discuss later, the city is also updating the environmental justice element, which is all about ensuring greater equity in the land use and the planning decisions in the community, and certainly addressing inequities in exposure to hazards and in the effects of natural hazards. That is a big part of the safety element as well. So with that, I then want to get into a little bit more of the detail around one of the major technical pieces that have come out of this process, which is the vulnerability assessment. As I mentioned, that is a requirement under state law. The vulnerability assessment follows a 4-step process that you see here that is laid out in the state's guidance for this type of work. We begin by identifying exposure, what are the hazards that are affected by climate change that are present in Burlingame, and how might they change in frequency or severity or in other characteristics as climate change occurs. We look at who and what in the community is potentially affected by those hazards, and also looking at what is called adaptive capacity, which is the ability of a population, a building, an asset, some other component to resist and to recover from the hazards. So the vulnerability assessment is a function of both the severity of a hazard and the ability for it to cause harm or damage to a group of people or to some asset of the community, but also looking at how quickly can the community, the population, the asset bounce back. So the greater the severity of the impact and the less of that adaptive capacity, generally the greater the vulnerability. So there are 7 kind of priority hazards that we've identified that are related to climate change that may have significant impacts in the community one way or another. These are not all necessarily equal in their severity, but I think certainly some things like sea level rise, flooding, wildfire are probably going to be a little more prevalent than things like ecosystem pests. But nonetheless, these all still may have potential for harm in some parts of the community. We've also identified what we're calling the priority populations or assets, which are the people and the assets who are potentially most at risk from climate change. Older adults, persons with chronic illnesses and or disabilities or access and functional needs, low-resourced households, and outdoor workers are all among the populations in the community who may be most severely affected by climate change. And I should point out that low-resourced households not only includes persons making less than the median income, but in the Bay Area where housing prices are so high, it can also include people who are making, moderate incomes or even might be considered quite well off. But because of the high cost of housing, their income or their disposable income, the income that they have, yes, the income that is remaining to them after the cost of housing, after the cost of transportation, after the cost of utilities, that can be quite constrained, and that can limit their ability to prepare and recover from a hazard. So we do want to be clear on that definition as well. Looking beyond the populations, the transportation infrastructure and the access to public transit in Burlingame is potentially at risk. Not only damage to the Caltrain line might affect that system, but also blocked roadways from flooding can affect the bus. That is a major lifeline for a number of community members, and that really can have an impact on their well-being and on the overall economy of the community. Certainly a number of homes are potentially at risk of being damaged or destroyed by climate change, especially those in some of the areas that are most affected by natural hazards, such as the new wildfire hazard maps that were recently released, and in some of the areas that are more prone to flooding or sea level rise. And also some of the hotels and lodging operations in the community, even if they themselves may not be directly damaged as a result of climate change related hazards, any large scale hazard or disaster in the community is going to affect visitors. So there is a significant potential for economic harm as well. And the expected impacts of climate change are probably not terribly surprising, but we are certainly expecting there to be increases in intense rainfall, drought conditions are expected to become more frequent and more prevalent. We've seen that even this past week, where the drought forecasts and the drought conditions in California have amplified greatly. Extreme heat is not something we used to have to worry too much in this area. That is now changing. We have seen that quite a bit in recent years. Of course, more frequent and intense wildfires, even if they're not directly in our backyard, we know that any wildfire in Northern California has the potential to significantly affect our air quality and our quality of life. We've seen that in recent years. And of course, the impacts of the shoreline area through sea level rise, coastal flooding, and the emerging iteration of what's called emerging groundwater, where as the sea level rises, the groundwater is pushed up as a result of that. And that can lead to higher water tables in much of the community. And in some low-lying areas, there may even be localized flooding as that groundwater is pushed to the surface. So the safety element is identifying programs and policies that are meant to respond to these hazards, both as they currently exist, but also, as I mentioned, to lay the groundwork against their changes in the next 30, 50, even 70 to 80 years. So given the results of the vulnerability assessment, given the challenges that we know the community is facing, we are moving into the process of identifying policies that we can include in the safety element to help protect against these hazards. The boards in the back of the room contain some higher level policy concepts that we'd like to begin getting feedback on. There are another lists of policies that we are going to work with city staff to review and revise and then bring forward in the draft safety element later this year. The policies are based on the results of the vulnerability assessment, but also results that we've heard from the community, both at this event and at events that were held last year. We're looking at best practices that we've seen from other jurisdictions in San Mateo County, in the wider Bay Area, a few cases across California. We are, of course, looking at what is the state requiring, making sure that Burlingame is compliant with the state law, and incorporating the relevant language from the local hazard mitigation plan. So in the safety element, when you do see it presented later this year, you will see some higher level goals and specific policies that are providing the overall direction for the city to implement these actions and be a safer and more resilient community. We will include specific implementation language, which is what will direct the language that will actually direct the city to take these actions. We are going to include performance metrics, which are ways for the city to measure how effective these actions are being, to report on them, and then to change or revise an approach if it turns out it's not being successful. And we also want to include timelines for implementation and identify who in the city is going to be responsible for carrying it out, just so there is greater accountability and greater clarity around making sure that these efforts are actually put into place. Just to be clear on the framework, a goal is meant to be a very high level direction, statement of what the community is working towards. Under the goals, you will see a number of policies, which are directions of intent. And then under the policies, you will see implementation actions, which are, as I mentioned, the specific direction to the community. So what we are currently working on are the goals and the policies. And once those are not necessarily set in stone, but at least we have a firmer idea of what that all looks like, we will then draft the implementation actions to carry those goals and policies out. I mentioned that we've based a lot of these on some of the earlier feedback that we've gotten. This is just a summary of some of the feedback that we received in the past year. Community members were concerned quite a bit about the impacts of flooding. Many people mentioned power outages, both from unexpected from various natural hazards, as well as the risk of the power being shut off during high winds, public safety power shutoff events. And then there is, of course, the growing concern around sea level rise, some concerns about erosion and coastal flooding. Extended heat waves are a growing issue of concern to the community, especially in homes that lack air conditioning. And many people did bring up the air quality impacts from wildfires. There is a lot of action that people have said they would like to do, but for various reasons they felt unable to do to better protect themselves. The costs of hardening a home is probably the first and greatest complaint that people raised, certainly understandably so. Many people did speak up about what they felt is a lack of coordination between different neighborhoods. People in some cases felt they were not aware of the resources that would be available to help them out to better prepare for a disaster. And many spoke out about challenges that seniors and persons with disabilities and access and functional needs face. Even if they had the financial means to harden their home, even if they have the physical or the knowledge on what to do, sometimes they felt they just faced the physical inability to carry out those changes. So these are all barriers that we are going to be looking at. How do we address these? And how do we reduce or eliminate these through the policies and the safety element? We also conducted a number of stakeholder interviews with various service providers. This includes some of the utilities, transit providers, community health groups, some of the environmental groups, community-based organizations who work with many of the disadvantaged persons in the community. They all, I think, had similar comments about some of the concerns and the barriers that they've experienced in their day-to-day work. And they also proposed some similar recommendations: provide greater education to the community, strengthen the cooperation both within the neighborhoods and between Burlingame and other communities in San Mateo County. And also something that came up quite a bit with the service providers is the importance of nature-based solutions, using grasses, trees, other what are called green infrastructure, softer infrastructure, as a way of helping the community to be more resilient, as opposed to hardscape or concrete or asphalt, which may not work as well in all cases. We've also conducted a number of meetings with what were called community of concern meetings, and these were dedicated meetings that were held throughout the county with our community partner, CRC. These meetings were conducted mostly or entirely in Spanish, and they were, I think, very detailed explorations of some of the challenges that the historically marginalized and disadvantaged communities in San Mateo County have faced, and some of their concerns and priorities for what they'd like to see in the safety element. Those community members certainly identified the importance of providing multilingual emergency alerts and day-to-day information about safety. They identified a need for improved evacuation instructions when evacuations are necessary, and making sure that there's good information about where people can get shelter. And they also called out the need for better access to resources to help them prepare for natural disasters. They also recommended greater partnerships and more trust building, bringing more of the community-based organizations into the process for creating a more resilient community. They suggested conducting regular forums, community meetings around public safety issues, making sure communications were culturally appropriate and accessible, getting back to the multilingual point. They also suggested a paid safety ambassador program, which would empower local experts to work with these communities to help foster greater preparedness and greater resiliency. So that is something that we are looking at recommending in the safety elements. So given that, we have, as I said, some draft policy concepts on the boards. It is certainly not the complete list of policies, and we would welcome any feedback from the City Council, from the Planning Commission, from the members of the public who are here on policies that they would like to see, certain challenges or barriers that they face that they think we might be able to address through these policies, and ways that we can really help to make sure that Burlingame is a safer and more resilient community, both in its current iteration and in the years and decades to come. And with that, I think that's the end of the safety element presentation. we'd be happy to, these are just some of the questions that we'd invite you to consider in your feedback, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Excellent. Thank you for the presentation, the update. I'm sure there are questions forming across the room, but if you're in the public, we ask that you fill out a pink sheet as well if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to speak about related to this particular topic. But I'll start first here with our Council and Planning Commission to see if there's any questions or comments initially. Yes, Council Member Colson.
Question. So I have a question on the marginalized groups or the groups that are vulnerable. We have seniors, we have, infrastructure of homes and things, but we don't have children. And our community is growing. Our children are growing. We have, our schools are really impacted, and we have all kinds of issues around crossing El Camino and safety on the roads, bike safety. So I think they actually warrant their own call out in that. Or could they be called out, I guess is the question.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate that. And in the full report, which is now available on the project website, and which city staff may make available on the city's website, children are called out. We have identified that. It's just
Great. That's great. That's perfect. You didn't have enough space for everybody.
exactly.
Any other questions? Yes,
A
Commissioner
question-
Fab.
A question, well, it's question/comment. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm seeing, I see some very challenging areas where the one policy is talking about having, and I do see that the community didn't want to go that way, but let's just go for the boilerplate that was on there about having, how was it called? Not drought resistant, but it was something like fire resistant landscaping. And that though also creates these the canopies disappear. So I'm finding a conflict in there because we want to keep the heat islands down because roofs in themselves are heat islands. And if you don't have some greenery around there, you're creating a worse situation, I think. So that's the one thing. The second is, we are densifying quite a bit and required to, and we've got the ADUs, and we've got a lot of the setbacks are being reduced, very close, buildings very close together. And then another policy, I'm not sure I saw it in here, but back there, make sure that the alleyways and such are free, like open enough to walk through and such. I'm just finding a lot of conflicts how you fix the one thing, but you can't, maybe you're not allowed to fix the other. Maybe, since you have to be dense, you gotta take greenery away or whatever, or get too close to another property and there's wind that can pull. I mean, in the case there would be a fire, easily move from one building to another, whether it's a man-made thing or whether it's a nature caused. So I have some conflicting, I don't know how that can be feasible given the constraints that are posed to us by a lot of state law. So I find conflict. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, yes, but Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Thank you. Do I need to use a mic? Would it help? Okay. So if we're doing the overview of safety, that would include the flooding? Is that right?
Yes.
So I guess I had a couple of comments based on the materials that I saw. One, I'll start with probably what I think might be the more important one, which is on the flooding side of the options that were detailed. And I mentioned this when we were over there, but missing from the options that are detailed is the idea of constructing defenses against sea level rise. And by the way, also defenses against emergent groundwater. And that's under very serious consideration by the city. There's a lot of questions that go with it. What would it look like? How would it get paid for? But I think not including that as a as a strategy and an option is we'd really be missing an important plank of our own safety and defenses. So we can talk offline about how to word that, but I think it's really important to capture that idea. Because personally, I think that is the right strategy for the next 50 years. It might not work 100 years from now, but for the next 50 to 70, it can. And any other strategy that relies on piece by piece by piece property improvement is going to leave our wastewater treatment facility underwater. So it's a significant threat to the city, quite aside from the economic impact. So that's one. Two, I think it's implicit, but I would point out that when drought and climate change come together, the way, or a common way, that Burlingame and residents are threatened is by the falling of large eucalyptus. And I think that should be called out because the city actually has a strategy. It was painful to get there, but we did, to rebuild El Camino Real. And also you see trimming going on along Caltrain to reduce that significant threat to property and lives. And by the way, then address at least one of the sort of protected classes that are called out under environmental justice, because those are where an awful lot of multifamily housing is, a lot of affordable housing, naturally occurring affordable housing is along El Camino Real. And so improving the sidewalks, improving the flooding, the drainage, and removing a fair number of the trees is, I think, a significant safety priority, and one, in fact, in this case, that we have a plan for, which is going to set the city back 15 to 20 million and the state back 130 million. So it's not insignificant. Anyway, so that's, and then on a very small point, I was looking at where we thought the biggest fire risks were, and I was surprised, as somebody who walks there, that Mills Canyon wasn't called out as a significant fire risk. I'm sure the people who live around Mills Canyon wouldn't agree with you or us or whoever came up with that. And so I guess I would ask the experts to review Mills Canyon and see if it really warrants that green color rather than yellow or red. Or perhaps you know the answer to that. I don't know.
Yeah, so the mapping that is presented there, those are the recommendations made by CAL FIRE. And the state looked at topography, climate, wind, historic events, and a number of other factors in making those determinations. The city is required to adopt some degree of those recommendations, I believe by the end of June. The city does have the flexibility to expand those zones if it desires. So if the city is interested in identifying more of the area around Mills Canyon as a fire hazard zone, you do certainly have that ability to do so.
Perhaps I should, before I blithely say we should, I should understand what the implications are.
If I could just jump in, the fire department is working on bringing an ordinance to you that it was going to go this Monday, but it needs a little more TLC. So it's going to go on the 5th for introduction, and we'll all find out a little bit more about what that means to be in the high and very high fire severity zones. Okay. Curiously, Hillsborough dropped out of the very high, which makes no sense to me. So we'll hopefully get a little bit more intel about how this all came about and what it means.
Okay, thank you. I mean, personally, when I think of Burlingame and I think of where a wildfire might really impact housing, that strikes me as one of the more one of the most likely places where it might happen. So anyway, thank you for the work. I appreciate it.
Any other questions from council or comments from council or planning commissioners?
I have one.
Yes, Commissioner Say.
Thank you. Yeah, on the I live near Mills Canyon, so that is an area of concern for me personally. But as we have a number of properties up in the hillside, Mills Canyon area, as well as over on off Canyon Road, there are a lot of steep properties, and our public works engineering departments require really strict adherence to soils, requiring soils reports, and have very stringent design guidelines for engineers to design foundations for new homes or homes getting remodeled or maintained. But for the many homes that are gosh, probably 75 years old, if not more, like that are not being remodeled and up on the hillsides. I worry about saturation of soil during all these heavy rains and concern about erosion and the possibility of some of these homes sliding down the hillside. So just wanted to bring that up as an area to also consider, if not already.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Just a couple questions. General, when you think about climate change, the pace is different on the different risks, right? In terms of sea level rise versus a fire risk versus something else. And so I'm curious about the frequency. Will there be recommendations on the frequency of this assessment effort to the participating cities? Secondly, would be in the recommendations, particularly when you translate from goal to here's the timeline and things, the natural question is, well, how much does that cost? And knowing that some of these things are not necessarily limited to the scope of a city, are there going to be elements where we at least have some visibility of an initial estimate on some of these recommendations that will come down in, my guess is the fall, right? In terms of the timeline for the project. So that's another one. And then the reciprocal is, and I was curious about the heat wave element and the risk from the community and whether or not that actually came from Burlingame versus maybe some other city that's more prone to heat domes and these types of issues, because most of the houses in Burlingame do not have air conditioning and don't necessarily need it, even if the temperature is rising, over the course of the next 20, 25 years. So what's that?
We have trees.
Well, trees too. Yeah, but I'm just curious about these.
As far as the updates go, the safety element does need to be updated every 8 years under state law. So at that time, that's a good opportunity to look at what is the new information that is available and to re-identify the areas that are at risk and incorporate some of the new strategies. To your question on the costs, this is a general plan. We are keeping a relatively high level, but the questions around costs would likely be worked out through the regular budgeting process or the capital improvements plan as staff and the council look to implement specific language that is in the general plan.
So I would assume that the ownership is dependent on what the recommendation, whether it's more appropriately to budget and plan for it at a county level versus individual city. Is that fair, or is that, in other words, we kind of, obviously, as Vice Mayor Brown brought up, on sea level rise, it's not one city that needs to kind of address this. You got to look at it as how you're going to address it across the county or across the risk area. Is there going to be any visibility into this is a local effort versus should be a county effort in terms of these recommendations?
Yes, there will be. So for example, sea level rise, that's something where we recommend the city works closely with Shoreline, which is a countywide agency, and they can provide the coordination to make sure that everybody's moving in the same direction. And through that mechanism, I'm sure there will be more detail available around the costs of some of these strategies.
Thank you. Yes,
I'm
Commissioner
sorry,
Bell.
may I just ask one more thing? And it is directly, it's related to some of the public comments that were made in the beginning about soft story. That fits in this, that would be under this umbrella, right? Soft story buildings. Well, I think that definitely needs, we have talked about that a long time. So I do think that needs a highlight, because it's ongoing, doesn't matter what the weather is. So, thanks.
So I have a question for Director Zayer. In terms of how you would like this, do we want to have public questions on each area, or, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to make one comment about, I'm glad to see that within the priority populations and assets, that public transit access is called out as one of those assets. especially if this is a plan that we're looking at that's a 2050 year, like looking 80 years down the line, what effects climate change are going to have. I think we're really going to have to move more to a public transit mode in the Bay Area with the densification and everything. And so I'm really glad to see that. And I also want to second with the soft story. I mean, earthquake is a hazard in this area, and the soft story works perfectly into that. So that should be included as well, if possible.
Thank you. So if there are members of the public that want to speak specifically, raise a concern, suggest something, make a comment, ask a question on this safety element, now is the time to do so. So does anybody have filled in pink sheets? If not, it's okay. Come on up. We'll still figure out how we document that going forward.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ann Hinkle. A few years ago, I was canvassing for a city council member, and the area that I canvassed was on El Camino in a lot of soft story buildings. And my experience was that many of the people that lived there were non-English speaking. So my concern is their isolation and their lack of resources and what would occur for them in the event of an event like an earthquake. On another point, I would like to share that my brother lost his house in the Paradise Fire, and my nephew this year lost his house in the Altadena Fire. I mean, those are things that I never would have expected to happen to impact our family. So, you know, there's a lot that's going on. And third thing to say is how much I really appreciate the efforts and the commitment of Burlingame for taking care of protecting our environment and our folks. Thank you all.
Thank you. Any other public speakers? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to the next topic.
Sorry, just before we move
Sure.
on, Mr. Mayor. Can you remind us then
The
what
microphone, please.
oh, sorry. Can you remind us then what the process is? You're taking this input and then what?
So we are taking this input. We are going to be using it to further inform the policy development. The policy language will be shared with city staff. They will review and revise it. And all of that will then inform the implementation actions, the more specific direction to the city for how to put the safety element into effect. We are then going to prepare a draft safety element, which will be released to staff later this summer. They will review, revise, and then it will be made available for public review, probably late summer, early fall. At that time, it will also need to be submitted to various state agencies, including CAL FIRE, for their review. And then it would be ready. The idea is it would be ready for adoption hearings later in the fall, potentially into winter of early next year, if that's the timeline that the city would prefer.
So if I may, can we get a draft before it comes to final council for final approval? Can we see it a little earlier than sometimes we do?
Absolutely. We'll share the public review draft with council and the planning commission, and we can all review.
Thank you.
One more question.
Yes, Councilmember Coulson.
Just in preparing that report, I noticed in one of the slides, there was a sort of comment around sort of cost and, you know, what these measures cost. Because it's one thing to put a plan together and then another thing to figure out how you're going to fund it. So does the plan discuss that or talk about that or quantify that?
So we don't intend to put specific dollar amounts because it is a general plan and the amounts can change quite a bit. But what we would like to do in the implementation language of the safety element is to include some potential funding sources. So whether it would be funded through a general fund, bond measures, grants, and any of the other options out there. We do want to provide some direction to the city on what might be the best way to get money for these efforts.
Yeah, and I would think if your scope of assessment included the input from other cities, other municipalities who may have gone a little bit before where we are, there would be some good rules of thumb around funding and how they did that. So to the extent that we can have some of that visibility would be very helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay, last chance. No, okay, let's go on to topic 2.
All right. Yeah, topic 2 is the other element that we are working on the update of, which is preparation of the environmental justice element. So basically, when we talk about environmental justice, what we mean is excuse me, the right of everyone, regardless of race, color, ethnicity, income, nation of origin, etc., to have the same environmental protections and access to the same benefits. And also to have meaningful involvement in the community and to not be excluded from the decision-making process. Working towards that does require governments like the city of Burlingame to have laws, policies, and regulations in place that do address some of the systemic racism and systems of oppression that have been put into place. We know that those systems have resulted in lower income communities, communities of color, other marginalized groups being placed in areas where they have been exposed to greater levels of pollution and greater levels of other hazards, both natural and human caused. So this is really all about addressing those inequities, halting them, and then as best we can, reversing them to build a more equitable society. And of course, it requires very robust engagement with the communities themselves to make sure that their values, their priorities, and their voices are being heard. Not only is this, I would say, the right thing to do, but it is also the state law. So California law does require that cities address environmental justice in the general plan. There is legislation that requires that communities first identify where what we call EJ or environmental justice communities are. Where are the greater concentrations of communities that have and still do experience these inequities. Assess the particular challenges that are present for those communities in these different locations, and then to include in the general plan some policies and actions to, as I mentioned, hopefully halt and ideally reverse those inequities. So in the city of Burlingame, here's what we've done so far. First, we have identified the areas where there are greater concentrations of environmental justice populations. We're calling them the equity focus areas. We have conducted community engagement around educating people about these areas and the issues that they have experienced. And that engagement has been conducted both in English and in Spanish. And what you're seeing here are some of the types of events that we have done and the number of people who have participated in them, including a survey that was completed at the end of last year that had 170 different responses from community members. We were quite happy with that. We have identified some of the regular environmental justice issues, the challenges, the inequities that these communities have faced. And we are beginning to develop policy approaches to address these inequities. The policies for the environmental justice element are not quite as far along as they are in the safety element. So we don't have specific policy examples or concepts to share with you this evening, but those will be coming. These are the draft the draft equity focus areas: Northwest Burlingame, East El Camino Real corridor, and then East Burlingame. And then on the right side there, you can see some of the key issues facing each of those communities. There are some common challenges. Low tree canopy, for example, is common in all three areas. But then there are some issues that are more relevant to particular communities. So for example, groundwater contamination, very much an issue in East Burlingame and the El Camino Real corridor, not as significant an issue in Northwest Burlingame. So we do want to make sure that while this is a part of the general plan, it is meant to apply citywide, it is our still intent that the policies reflect the specific needs and the specific issues of each of the neighborhoods that have been identified. So these are some of the key concepts around environmental justice. We've identified some of the types of policies that we'll be looking at, including in the environmental justice element, addressing these priority issues, traffic impacts and air pollution, the issue of housing affordability, and the issue of industrial pollution and contamination, since even if those the sources that have created that pollution may have been closed for decades, but in many cases that pollution is still present in the soil and in the water. We want to make sure that it is removed and that it is not creating a threat to human health. So what is next for the environmental justice element is we are looking back through the healthy people and the healthy places element and other components of the general plan, beginning to call out policy that we want to include in the new environmental justice element. We will be preparing that later in the summer and into the fall. And then the idea is that that updated environmental justice element, the healthy places and healthy people element, will be ready for adoption by the spring of next year. And I think that concludes the environmental justice presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Eli. Yeah, I'll ask colleagues on the commission and council first. Yes, Council Member Papajohn.
Thank you, Mayor Stevenson. Just a question about the equity focus areas. So when you did looked into researching to find these 3 areas, is this like just a snapshot in time now, or do you take into consideration like the next 8 years before we do the next update? Because I feel like some of those neighborhoods, perhaps in Northwest Burlingame, may be changing. And so how do you factor in what might happen over the next few years or 8 years or so?
It is certainly a challenge because, we know some of these broader trends, but it can be difficult to predict exactly, of course, what will happen. A lot of the identification of these areas is based on current and historic data. The state collects a lot of that and makes it available around what are the population impacts and also what are some of the underlying environmental and economic challenges that are present in these areas. We have worked with city staff to identify these 3 equity focus areas and to try and adjust them as best as we can to account for changing development pressures and displacement issues, what we know the city is working towards. So as best as we can, we think these are the environmental justice communities that are present in Burlingame, but certainly when it comes time to update this again, I would imagine some of these boundaries might shift a little. And I think that's just the nature of the policies.
Thank you. Yes, Vice Mayor Romrey.
I was just curious, what is the nearby solid waste facility? Is that the old dump?
Yes, I think so.
Old dump?
We're talking.
We know where Topgolf is.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that was called out by whom as a threat? By us or by the neighbors?
I believe at least a good chunk of that data, part of this determination is just based on where are these facilities and what is the contamination in the soil. And in that case, it would have been identified by the state, probably the Department of Toxic Substances Control.
And then my last question is, if you can you paraphrase the 170 survey responses if there was an issue or two or the public comment too, but was there issues that rose to the top for survey respondents in environmental justice?
I have not reviewed those survey responses. That's not something I can do at this time. I'm not sure if Ruben or Nate are able to answer that, but if not, we can get a summary back to you.
There was a summary done, and if it isn't already posted on the project website, we'll do that this evening, and you can read the summary data of what the responses were.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Phan.
Yeah, I just noticed a commonality I'm kind of surprised at the areas of focus here, but one is low tree canopy. So how was that actually determined? Because all three areas have low canopy. Was there some kind of a aerial done, or how was that determined, or was comments from people there? Or what?
I believe there is some work that the state has done to identify areas of higher or lower tree canopies. So I think it's partly based on that.
Oh, you're saying high tree canopy,
No.
low, what are you saying?
Sorry, high level
Oh,
work.
high level,
has been
right.
done.
Yeah,
But I believe
that
the
quantity,
community,
that's what I thought. I was kind of surprised, so.
but I believe the community has also called that out.
Okay.
As,
So yeah, so we have to see the differences. They want more trees because everybody usually wants more trees. Or is it a fact that the canopy density is low? So I don't know. That's what I was asking. And I did just want to ask, and I may be telling you something, mentioning something you already know, so I'm sorry, but for the benefit of everybody, I've been reading about this Dutch researcher, urban planner, arborist fellow, and he's kind of making the rounds all over. His name's way too complicated, so I'm not going to even bother. But he started this a couple of years ago, talking about the 3, 30, and 3,000 rule, 3K, which is ideally every city should shoot for this goal or rule, and it's that in your home, your workplace, and your school, that you could look out a window and see at least 3 mature trees, that you, what's the 30? Now let me get this right. Oh, that there would be at least 30% of a tree canopy in your neighborhood. 40 is better because that helps with the heating, but 30, and the 3,000 is in meters, which is about 1,000 feet, a little less than 1,000 feet, that you would need to only go 1,000 feet or 3K, 3,000 meters to an open space, a park, or some public area to enjoy open space, trees, whatever, what have you. And it's kind of catchy because, 330, 3,000, and the idea was that every city could try to coordinate their infrastructure, their plantings, their general planning around a goal like that, because it kind of pulls everything together, the different areas of, departments of cities, so that they're not working in silos. So I just liked it. Seemed like it was sort of environmental justice too, and I just thought I'd share. So sorry, I don't know the guy's name, but if you type up 330, 3,000 rule, he comes right up. This Dutch guy. Thanks.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yes, Commissioner Say.
Thank you. Just a question, if there was any requests for Chinese language translation or written documents?
Not that we're aware of.
So I'm just, I'll speak for myself as a Chinese person. The Mills Estate part of our city is pretty heavily populated with Chinese-speaking people, and my people tend to be more quiet and don't really get as involved in greater, beyond kind of household family needs. And I'm just curious if we had written materials that are being mailed to our homes in English and in Spanish, and if Chinese was also included, that we may be engaging more people and their concerns or thoughts, possibly. But I was just kind of curious if it's not hard to do, that we do that, or if there's any consideration for that.
Yeah, we can look at that a little bit closer and see what that would encompass.
Thank you.
Good. And yes, Commissioner Shores.
Hi, thank you. You've already sort of attacked this question from a few other angles so far, but I would like to know kind of overall how the criteria for determining the equity focus areas, kind of where that comes from, where the data and rationale comes from, and then how you draw the boundaries around them.
So I believe the boundaries are census block groups. So federal communities that they've laid out. Sorry. Yeah. Census block groups, the state identifies a number of metrics through a tool called CalEnviroscreen, which for all census block groups, it shows, I think, about 20 key metrics that are all related to environmental justice and measures kind of the relative performance of these areas in those metrics for all block groups in California. So those that score, if you will, highly in a certain impact are those where there are greater environmental justice issues. So I believe that's what informed the identification of these 3 neighborhoods and their boundaries, along with the conversations with city staff and of course with the community members who live there.
Thank you.
Good. Any other questions? Yes, Councilmember Thayer.
Just one comment here regarding also these equity focus areas. And I understand it might not make sense to add this now because it's an area that we're building out and we only have one apartment building up there at 1 Adrian Court, but I do believe it's close proximity to 101, the non-existent tree canopy at this point because it's a neighborhood we're building out. Maybe it could just be called out as like North Rollins is something we should definitely look at again in 8 years, but just not to lose that, new neighborhood that we're bringing online.
Yeah. Thank you. Just a couple comments, and it deals with this map. So I get the data from an environmental perspective in terms of environmental justice because of sea level rise and the proximity to the bay or past industrial areas that are now more residential, and so groundwater contamination. So I get that lens from an environment perspective. I don't get that lens from the full scope of environmental justice in terms of the equity side of it. I would love to see a little bit more granularity because I could look at El Camino, which is on, north of in the green areas. Why is that any different when there's still high density housing in those areas? I live in East Burlingame, and the socioeconomic spectrum is extremely wide. And so while I think the lens needs to have 2 perspectives, and it can't be planning at just one lens perspective, it has to be planning done at both because it's very different. Yes, Councilmember Coulson.
Yeah, I think I went to a few of these sessions, and we work on this all the time with Peninsula Clean Energy. I think part of the problem is that we have vulnerable people in our community that are in every single census tract and every single census block, and they might be renters, they might be elderly, they may be people who are unemployed. Who knows what the reason is? So the real issue when you're trying to put together these focus areas, they have to somehow draw a geographic boundary around them. And by definition, you're going to leave people out of the geographic boundary. And I think the important thing is to understand that that is not the only group of people who are vulnerable. They're just where the higher concentration of people tend to be. And really, if you look at that map, it's predominantly where our multifamily residential is. If you consider, El Camino and the apartments on the south side of Burlingame Avenue, all of El Camino, and then up in the kind of Mills Estate area, the single-family home neighborhoods have tended to be a little more, have tended to not include these. Originally, I think my census tract was on it, which I don't think people understood that there are a lot of apartments in my neighborhood, a lot that I walk by. There sometimes look like single-family homes, but they are in fact multifamily residential. So I'm not 100% sure that we can capture everyone with a geographic map, but I think we can, in the report, capture through the vulnerable communities that you stated, seniors, renters, et cetera, people who maybe don't fall in that geographic area. I think that's what it came out to.
Okay, I just look at Burling Gables, which is right in the middle of that yellowish block. That is a completely different socioeconomic view than the folks that live on Rollins Road. And so I get it from an environmental standpoint. Yes, they probably have the same environmental issues. But if we're talking about outreach, we're talking about language engagement, we're talking about that aspect of environmental justice, including all races, just like you said at the beginning, I think we need at least some language in there that is a little bit more granular.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, part of it is just the nature of the block groups. You know, the boundaries are what they are, and we can certainly provide that greater granularity. I'll also note that even though the environmental justice element is focused on these three communities, is not to say that the efforts and the policies would only be implemented in these three locations.
Do you look at, I think the other data that's really helpful for this is the CARA and FARA data. So anyone who's on CARA and FARA, because during COVID, Councilman Brownrigg or Vice Mayor Brownrigg and I were at the library for over a week, almost every day for 2 or 3 hours, handing out sort of supplemental emergency cash to our CARA and FARA residents. And frankly, you would be shocked at who showed up. So there's, I think, a lot of people who maybe live in a house they inherited from their parents, or they live in, maybe it might be a single mother situation, seniors. I think I got 4 or 5 calls from seniors just this week, mainly in that neighborhood. So there tend to be a few more seniors in there. And that's, I think, where we were seeing some of the care. And that's also where our Title I schools are. Our 2 Title I schools are Washington and McKinley. And those 2 neighborhoods
Are there.
That's where those are. So I actually think there's some logic to that, but to the mayor's point, there are people throughout the community that I think are vulnerable and at risk. So, yeah.
Good. Any other comments from the commission, council? How about any public comments? Okay, seeing none. Just thank you again for that update. Just to recap, the timeline is probably spring of 26 for this particular element update. Okay, thank you. So now moving on to the third topic, which is around the existing and proposed state housing laws. Director Thayer, would you like to kick us off?
Thank you, Mayor Stevenson. If we could just take a brief moment, quick 2 minutes to let our consultants excuse themselves, and then we'll shift places. Myself and Joe Sanfilippo will be doing this part. If you just give us a quick second to
Absolutely.
maybe
And
take
maybe
a bathroom break.
folks in the public want to get more water or some more food, take a couple of minutes to do so.
No, it's probably like when they did the districting. Yeah, that one where you ran for the.
About what?
Very hard for me also.
Yeah, I'll have
Everything has to have a
Ned is
fine line
prepared-
around it.
Well, Ned
all.
is prepared to do the overview on it, and then,
Pardon?
then we can talk about it. She's analyzed it because it was a big bill, and I wasn't exactly sure what, all I knew is the summary. We can definitely do that, but I can talk about more generally, like, this is just another sort of assault on local control, just another local
Interesting.
control bill that we've,
I'm ready for that. They
about that.
Yeah.
Throw
9 of them away.
Questions.
Oh.
I think he answered.
Give you more space. Give you more space.
Yeah.
Are you still gonna be running the slides?
That's right.
Still, okay.
Well,
there's a bill.
Pause.
There's a bill there's a few bills that are working. There's some bills that we're gonna talk about. Yeah. There are a few things. Well, no, it's fast.
And, you know,
So we have to think about,
well
well,
over.
well, that's what we're talking about
Right.
today. Yeah.
Well
Yeah.
over. Whether they, you know, some want
I
to
know.
and some need to. And so, you know, that maybe skews a lot too.
But that's what they choose to
I
read.
don't know.
So if you want.
I added the questions at the end, so we'll.
Very
Your
interesting.
language, I'm more likely to read it.
Otherwise,
It's like the lecture materials.
Yeah.
Maybe, if there's something in Chinese saying, are you interested in this? Do you feel like there's some environmental injustice? Go here.
you're gonna gloss.
No, this slide.
Oh, I see what you said.
Oh, you lost your chance.
This is the.
But I'm sure it's nice.
No.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, for like for the,
Yeah. You can go.
To start.
the
I want to turn on the.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, I wonder if, I mean.
Okay, we're gonna,
Cars there.
Not that most Chinese people will read English, but it's multi-generational.
I don't know. That's weird.
The
It's
older
like-
ones may not, and they're not comfortable reading the English text.
okay, the mics are hot again, and so we're gonna get started. Again, this topic is an update on the existing and proposed state housing laws. So with that, I'll turn it over to Director Thayer and Zaire, sorry, and Joe.
I take it as a compliment, Councilmember Thayer.
We have too many names that are pronounced.
I know the YER will get you. Thank you, Mayor Stevenson, council members, planning commissioners. Myself and Joe Sanfilippo will be doing this next segment of the state housing law update. Some existing laws that may be some of the most impactful ones for our city, as well as proposed ones that are being discussed at the state level. I do want to put an overarching broad caveat that these laws are very nuanced. There's a lot of criteria and detail, and planners are often ridiculed when asked a question that our common answer is, well, it depends. And there's a lot of that when it comes to state law too. It will depend from project to project or scenario to scenario, or which state laws are being layered on top of each other, which is a common practice used now for development projects. So I'm going to provide a very high overarching theme, but no, there's a lot of nuanced detail layering. And to avoid bogging us down in the details, I'll try to stay out of the weeds of that. So the first law that wanted to highlight is the state density bonus law. This is a state law that has been around for a while. However, in recent years, it has been given more juice by the state in recent laws that have been updated. So just a basics on state density bonus is this law particularly allows residential projects to add extra density if they include affordable units in the project. So if the regulations, the city's zoning regulations or its general plan regulations allow, for example, 20 units per acre, they can include a certain amount of affordable units in the project and get an increase in the affordable or in the amount of density. So say they provide 10% very low income affordable units, they can potentially get 30% extra density for that site. So the intent here is the state was trying to encourage and produce affordable housing units that are deed restricted for a certain period of time and certain amount of affordability in exchange to incentivize developers by giving them extra density. The density bonus law also has its own set of parking regulations that are irrespective of the city's regulations. They are allowed formulas based on the amount of density bonus they are getting and the amount of affordable units, and there's a lot of nuances there as well. And then another tool that they built into this law is a developer can ask for flexibility in development standards that are within the city's regulations through the use of concessions and waivers. And this is this law's terminology, and basically it's a variance. So they get to ask for certain variances under the state law based on the amount of affordable units they're providing. Those types of concessions and waivers could look like extra building height, reducing their setback requirements, providing less open space and landscaping. And by no means is it limited to this list. It gives them the flexibility, them being the developer, the flexibility to choose which standards they want to waive. So that's the basics of the law. In 2021, AB 2345 went into effect, and this increased the state density bonus law by allowing up to 50% bonuses. So under this law, if you pick one of these three affordable amounts and mixes, so 15% very low, or 24% low, or 44% moderate, and you include that amount of affordable units in your project, you can get a 50% density bonus. So an example that's provided here on the screen is, say you had a 1 acre site that had a allowed density under the city's regulations of 100 units per acre. So they could build a 100-unit project. Under old state density bonus law, there would be a table and formulas and percentages of the amount and type of affordability and the percentage of density, and you'd pick off of that table and say in this case they built 11 affordable units and got a 35% density bonus. Well, they'd get 135 units for that project. Under this law, they could pick 15% very low income units, include that, and get a 50% density bonus, meaning they'd be able to build 150 units on that site. Okay. And then just in 2024, AB 1287 went into effect, which is coined the density bonus layering law, which allows a project that is already using the AB 2345 project density to add an additional 50% on top of that. So an example here on the screen is we'll take that same site where they could do 100 units based on our regulations on a 1 acre site. They do the 15% very low income and they get their 50% density bonus, and they're going to do 150 units. They can then layer on top of that this new law that would allow them, if they build a certain amount of affordable units based on the law. So for example, 15% moderate income units, they can get an additional 50% density bonus. So they would effectively take a 100-unit project to a 200-unit project by layering those two laws on top of each other. Moving on to the next, so that's state density bonus law. Moving on to the next alphabet soup of state laws. These are categories under residential projects that are now allowed in commercial zones. So in 2023, AB 2011 and SB 6 went into effect. And just recently, on January 1st, 2025, AB 2243 went into effect that amended AB 2011 and SB 6. And this is a set of laws that allow for residential projects to now occur in commercial zones. So in zones where cities' regulations did not allow residential to occur before. These laws allow the ministerial approval of housing development. And then the term ministerial is really important because ministerial means without hearings. So these are staff level approvals done without public hearings that we would have to do based on reviewing it on the criteria established in our existing regulations coupled with state law. And it would be to use these requirements as well as objective design standards. So the city would not be able to use any type of standards that weren't objective or codified in any of our regulations. We wouldn't have the ability to ask for nice to, or could you, or have you considered also including this. It would just be to off of our regulations. So there's 3 types of buckets based on this law. And I do, again, want to preface, there's a lot of nuances and a lot of criteria. This is really high level, but and certain stipulations get you certain of these things. But in general, AB 2011 has 2 buckets, which they call mixed income and 100% affordable. The mixed income is a residential project that has some affordable units in it, but it's not 100% affordable. And then their 100% affordable is just, as it indicates, 100% affordable project. For the mixed income, a developer can pick a commercially zoned property, and typically if a city's regulations haven't allowed for residential in an area, they don't have prescribed density on that. It's got maybe an FAR and some development standards, but we haven't associated like 20 units per acre because residential is not allowed. So the law has established buckets based on population size, certain criteria that a developer uses to determine how many dwelling units per acre they get. That's a range between 30 and 80 dwelling units per acre. The site has to be about 20 units, 20 acres or less to qualify. It has to be along a commercial corridor with at least 50 feet of frontage along that corridor. They do have to include some affordable units in into the project. That's also based by the formulas in the law. There's no parking requirements based on the law. They can build it with no parking. They are CEQA exempt. So not only is it ministerial, there's no environmental review that's done with this. They do qualify for density bonus. So the density bonus law and the 2 layering laws do apply for these projects. So even though they can, under the law, get 30 to 80 units an acre, they can then layer state density bonus to up that 100, 120 units per acre based on the amount of affordable units they use based on the state laws. And then given the size, based on the amount of units they are proposing, they will have to do prevailing wage and possibly skilled and trained labor as part of the requirement. There is other criteria too, but these were kind of the high level of note and importance. For the 100% affordable, it needs to be at least a low income deed restricted project. Again, no parking requirements, CEQA exempt. They can use state density bonus law, which is a lot bigger for 100% affordable projects, and also have to do prevailing wage and skilled labor. And then SB 6 is a similar but separate law that basically allows a residential project to be proposed in a commercial zone and invoke SB 330 and the Housing Accountability Act, which has its own set of criteria. So where SB 330 and the Housing Accountability Act has been in effect for many years on sites that are zoned for housing, they're basically taking those regulations for sites that were zoned for housing and saying you can now use them also on sites that are not zoned for housing. So they're basically carrying over those regulations into other commercially zoned properties. Similar to AB 2011, it has to be a project density, has to be at least a 20 acre or less site. They have to do at least 50% residential as part of their project. There is no maximum density associated with this, but there is a minimum density and it has to be at least 20 units per acre. They can use density bonus with this law as well, and they do have to do prevailing wage and skilled and trained labor for this. Okay, so basically, in summary, the state has taken what they have been allowing on residentially zoned properties in cities and said, we're opening that up for commercially zoned properties too.
All right, good evening, council and commission. As I'm sure you're aware, there are many, many, many housing bills that are proposed and many that are passed every year. Tonight, we will be looking at two pending state bills from Senator Wiener. The first one we're looking at is SB 677. This proposes some amendments to SB 9 and SB 35, which are existing laws. So we do have some regulations about SB 9. Currently, SB 9 allows ministerial approval on lot subdivisions for single units. They can be split into 2 lots, have 2 units each, creating 4 units. Under SB 677, SB 9 would be clarified that it applies to all R1 zones and then adjusts certain development standards that are described more fully in this bill. And SB 35 allows ministerial streamlined approval of residential projects that include at least 50% of their units affordable to lower income households. The amendments proposed under SB 677 would change this 50% affordable requirement to 20% of the units affordable to lower income households. And this provision would only apply when housing element above market rate unit requirements have been met, but affordable unit requirements have not been met. So if this bill were to go into effect right now, based on our most recent APR, we have not hit our above market rate unit requirements, but it's the most likely goal of any jurisdiction to hit. So this would probably go into effect should this bill pass.
What's the logic behind reducing the amount of affordable housing when you hit your market rate quantities?
I think this bill is trying to make it easier for projects to pencil and or receive financing. But I guess for both of these bills and any pending state legislation, obviously there could be amendments if it passes, and the bill could very well not pass either. So this is our understanding at the time that we prepared this presentation, but I can't speak on the merits or Senator Wiener's, thought process for this change proposed.
Yeah, just so I understand, it's your question, Vice Mayor Brownrigg, in regards to cities that have already met their housing element commitment and why they would be subject to this, or is this different?
It feels like a policy objective that's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
You're already building enough market rate, and now we'll make it even easier to build more market rate. But far be it for me to second guess.
All right, so this next bill is another Wiener bill, SB 79. As you can see in this first definition on the slide, it allows multifamily residential on basically every type of use other than public or institutional land near major transit stops. It establishes different transit tiers that have different sets of development standards, and then ministerial review applies if a jurisdiction has not permitted enough housing for each income category in the housing element. So it is very difficult for a jurisdiction to permit enough housing for each income category. So if this bill passes, it would apply in Burlingame and very well throughout the state. So we can go to the next slide, and that has the specific development standards currently proposed. You can see both of our stations based on their frequency of stops are tier 3 stations. So those are the development standards called out on the left. There are different development standards if a site is within 0.25 miles of a transit stop or 0.5 miles of a transit stop, which slightly changes the height limits and or FAR and or density units per acre. So the standards for sites within 0.25 miles are 55 height or the local height limits, whichever is greater, 80 dwelling units per acre, and a developer could propose to use density bonus on any projects that do utilize these provisions, and then the project would need to hit a 2.5 FAR, which is a floor area ratio. For sites within 0.5 miles of a transit stop, the height limit would be 45 feet or local height limits, whichever is greater, 60 dwelling units per acre plus density bonus and a 2.0 FAR. Properties directly adjacent to a transit stop are eligible for an additional 20-foot increase in height limit, 40 dwelling unit per acre increase, and a 1.0 FAR increase. So that would be mostly just for sites literally like the parking lots right next to the Caltrain stops is basically what that would apply to, but they do get some additional concessions, and parts of this bill would allow a transit agency to propose a development on any sites that they own directly next to a transit stop. So we could go to the next slide, and then Director Zayer has some recommendations on how we prepare for these changes.
So what does this all mean? Some of these laws are already in effect and we are subject to them, meaning if an application tomorrow comes into the city requesting to use AB 2011, the state density bonus layering, we are required to do it if they are meeting their criteria. Couple of things that came to my mind in analysis of this that would help prepare us or safeguard us is to take a look at our design standards and make sure all of our design standards are objective. Right now, we do have maybe limited design standards in some of our residential zones. Our commercial design guidelines and our residential design guidelines have not been updated. Particularly, our residential design guidelines have not been updated to be objective in nature. And so that's something we can work on to make sure they're subjective, that when these laws are invoked, that we have solid standards to point to require projects to adhere to. Secondly, particularly in light of AB 2011 and SB 6, that is opening up the use of the commercial zones to residential development. I know the city and this council and formal councils have been very thoughtful in protecting the Bayfront in being an employment, hotel, economic driver of the city. That area does now become susceptible to AB 2011 and SB 6 projects that can be proposed on those sites. I think it would behoove the city to work on a Bayfront specific plan and take a look at the infrastructure needs, circulation, any improvements, standards, or needs that would need to be developed with projects like that. As I mentioned earlier, we wouldn't have the ability to ask or suggest a project to do improvements. It would need to be in our regulations, and we would need a regulatory document to point to require them to do so. Since the general plan update in 2019, this council and commission is aware, having been involved in that process, that we did up the FARs, which did result in increased development activity on the Bayfront. This would be a good time to pause, look at those projects, how it's been shaping the Bayfront, and maybe adjust as we need, and then put in these regulatory documents to safeguard the city. Though we might not be able to stop or prevent a project from using these laws, at least we could get the most benefit for the community out of them when they do come in. That's our presentation. We're available for questions. Thank you.
Yes, we'll open up the questions first at council and commission. So yes, Commissioner.
Yeah, catch me, I'm falling. So, I mean, it's overwhelming. I don't, again, and this relates to what we just talked about. There's a point where these policies will conflict with the other policies we just talked about. The fire, do we have enough cooling from the trees? All this environmental stuff. And I don't I don't understand, is it possible to build in standards therefore that we need to have this many trees on whatever? Is that a standard or something to help fight that? Or, are they if you're saying they can negotiate the standards on height and setback, then somehow can we stick in something they cannot, that is non-negotiable? I mean, I don't know how all these pieces go together.
That's a very good question, and truthfully, a topic we wrestle on a daily basis. Unfortunately, state density bonus law leaves it in the hands of the developers to decide which standards they would like to use their concessions and waivers to get reprieve from. We can put objective design standards, tree count requirements, have the tree ordinance, and those are all the ways we safeguard. It doesn't prevent a developer from coming in and saying, I would like to use my state density bonus concession on not meeting our tree ordinance requirement. They do have the ability to indicate which ones they would like the reprieve on the basis that they believe that's an impediment to the development of their project and therefore building the affordable units. It then becomes incumbent on the city, not the developer, to find the nexus and develop a case and an argument that they do not need that, which is a very challenging legal argument to make if a developer has indicated they need it. So I go back to my planners love to say, it depends. It's important to have the standards in place to safeguard us, but we can't on every project win the battle of getting everything we want. We will do our best. But they do have some tools in their pockets to use.
So if I could just further ask, so you said you'd like to develop some standards, architectural standards. So couldn't they also say, I don't want to do that?
Yes, they can.
Yeah.
So it is a way to safeguard. It's not 100%. And, we can do it, but you're right. It doesn't prevent them from saying, I don't want to meet, I'm going to use my concession on that standard and my waiver on that. And this is a struggle of every city, unfortunately, but I think it's still important that we put objective design standards so we do at least have a menu of things. And if we don't get all of them, at least we could get 90% of them, 80% versus none.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Shores.
So we briefly have discussed before that a lot of these laws do have exceptions for a historic resource that might be on the property. I know that a lot of the laws more recently have been wording such to explicitly say it must be a designated historic resource. Do you know if they're continuing with that same language in these bills that are being proposed, or if they're using murkier language like eligible historic resource or something to that effect?
So I think this started really I saw this really starting evolving when there were some cities in response to some of these state laws early on started to historically designate their entire cities as historical districts or historical areas in an attempt to exempt themselves from state laws. We saw that happening in Pasadena and some of these other cities that do have historic resources, but in their efforts to avoid doing ADUs, they basically made all of their single family residential a historic district. And so the state laws started adjusting and building in language. I don't know if they'll start to get more aggressive in future laws. I found the tendency of the state is where cities have been clever in trying to assert or get out of some laws. They have then caught on to that, and then future laws have built in. So I think if in general, cities are thoughtful about their historic resources and not overextending the use of that they'll leave it alone. But I think, unfortunately, if cities start to get really aggressive again and trying to do districts and avoid laws, that they might ramp up and start exempting some of it more and more. I just don't know. So it was an interesting evolution.
Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions? Yep, Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just, more by way of a comment, and I know we all know this. I wouldn't want somebody listening, and it is recorded, to hear our conversation as Burlingame is trying to get out of building housing. Quite the reverse. This commission and this council have responsibly and effectively developed new planning for new housing. Our city has a collection of neighborhoods, and there's a lot of charm in different neighborhoods, and there are neighborhood schools in different neighborhoods. And so we intentionally built North Rollins Road as our next neighborhood. And what these laws do is completely undercut the ability to plan. And so one, I want to remind ourselves and remind anybody ever listening to this, we're doing what's supposed to be done, but we're doing it the way we want to do it. We're not blocking it. So I do support doing a specific plan on the Bayside because I don't think that's a good place for housing. It's just, could housing go there? Sure, could. It could go anywhere. And then parents are driving all the way across, 101 to schools, and who knows about a fire station that has to be out there and all sorts of things. And we have a beautiful neighborhood that we're trying to build out. And it's Rollins Road and it's right next to BART. So that's where the energy of the developer should be pointed. So I realize everyone here knows this, but I just wanted to say it on the record. We're doing it the right way, and we are doing it. We're not trying to avoid it. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, Councilmember Colson.
So the number one concern, there's so many concerns. The number one. There are so many concerns around this, and I really feel like there should be exemptions in all these laws for cities that are meeting at least the gross RHNA numbers and are complying with their housing elements and are zoning appropriately and have buildings under construction. This is just a little bit of, penalizing everyone in the classroom because one kid was talking. And it's just not fair. It really is unfair. And so I point that out as people think about, their state level elected officials and all the way up, because those people have a significant amount of impact on us. Now, I know we only get to vote for one, each, and that's it. But tell your friends, tell your neighbors, because this is just really indigestible. And the issue for me is, in addition to what Commissioner Pfaff has said around these sort of intersection of goals of, resilient communities and trees and, parks and everything, this is all getting cannibalized. But I'm mostly concerned about our schools. And we are the second densest city behind East Palo Alto. We have, the highest percentage, but again, behind East Palo Alto, of multifamily residential in our community. People move to this area, and they can move to this area because we have great schools. I was with someone the other day, there's 4 people living in a 1-bedroom apartment so they can put their kids in school here. We are dense. We are, we're trying our best to be more accessible, but I don't know how these are sort of what I would call unfunded state mandates. The state is mandating this, but they are not funding the infrastructure that is needed to go along with this. The schools, the addition to police, the addition to fire, figuring out ingress and egress and roads and safety issues, sea level rise. I don't know, are they exempt, Director Zaire, from our sea level rise, very hard fought and,
They would, when invoking, for example, AB 2011 or SB 6 on the Bayfront, if there was a site to be identified, there's no secret review. It's a ministerial process, and we just apply standards in place. So,
but we have setbacks, and we are
And they would be-
requiring them to start building at, say, 19 feet to avoid, and these are things that they should do, because no one should build a $300 million building and put 200 low-income people in it and know it's going to be flooded in 20 years. That's just irresponsible development. So do they have to comply with those kinds of standards?
Those are in our zoning standards, so yes. And
Okay.
a Bayfront specific plan can beef those up and even put more parameters that then we can point to for them to comply.
I think that would be my top priority. Can we require things like contributions of funding for schools so that we can help our school district purchase land that they're going to need to build a school if 5,000 housing units are out there?
Every project at building permit phase, when there are new state laws now that are allowing housing projects to pay their impact fees upon occupancy versus building permit issuance. But at occupancy, they would be required to pay for all their impact fees, including school impact fees. And those fees are to support the school system infrastructure and expansion.
And who sets those fees?
The school districts.
Okay, we should immediately have a conversation with the school district, BSD and San Mateo Union High School District, and they should immediately figure out what it's going to cost to buy land down there to build schools. Like that's probably something we should, I think Vice Mayor and I are part of that liaison committee, and I think they may not really understand and be aware of these new zoning ordinances. So I think it would be really responsible for us to do that. And they should really figure out what it's going to cost. If it's $40 million to build a school, then they need to figure out how to put $40 million of fees in. That's all there is to it. So I'm just very saddened that we've worked so hard on this and we've done such a good job. And I'm really saddened to see us get sort of swept up in what I think are probably punitive laws to, penalize cities that have fought back and fought. And it's just sad. So I would also like to suggest that we sit down with our assemblywoman and we sit down with our state senator and we talk to them about these concerns in a serious way. I'm sure every other city will be doing it. I'm sure council cities will be doing it. Maybe that's the vehicle, but I do think, Mayor, as mayor, you can reach out to the other cities, talk about this, and this needs to be something that we as a collective, San Mateo County, talk to our representatives about and make sure we know where their votes are going to lie on these future bills. And there's one additional bill. We're going to talk about that.
We did, if you don't mind going back, if you're referring to SB 79, we did
Correct.
touch on this.
Is this the one that we got the request to write a letter?
Yes, it
Okay,
is.
so this bill is pending. It would have to be signed still by the governor. It has to pass through the Assembly and the Senate. I would suggest this council take up a letter, graciously explaining that we have been meeting our needs and doing our work and the heavy lifting and why and how this would impact us, and that we would strongly advocate a no vote on this bill.
Yeah, I think it won't necessarily stop all the issues with the underlying approved bills or laws, but that would be a good first step, along with some of these others, addressing the zoning or design standards, talking to the schools, and making sure, because we're playing fair. We're doing the right thing. We're addressing it in a very thoughtful way, and I'm sure this was written for a handful of communities that were around.
And the kind of the irony of this is that because single family homes are in such high demand, it weirdly drives the prices of single family homes up astronomically because the demand for that is so high. And at least in our community, it's not feasible to buy an acre's worth of single family homes because the land costs would be too high and develop it. Even on small lots, it's talking to developers, it's rarely hasn't been penciling. But it might pencil in 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. So I think we have to really move on this quickly. And
It would be great to hear from the other council members on the idea of a letter as well as the support from the commission.
Yeah, totally. I was going, just backing up to how much support we would get from, let's use the example of the Bayfront. The impact fees from the schools, you're saying after occupancy there's a fill-in, but what about police and fire over there? Oops, things we've worried about always. What about those impact fees?
Similarly, the city has a category of impact fees that are collected. We have a police fee, a fire fee, a public facilities fee. We have a storm drain fee, a parks fee, a library fee, and the adopted fees are collected upon for housing projects upon occupancy, for commercial projects upon permit issue.
And they've been recently assessed so that it reflects not a grade separation issue where the numbers are all off. Have they been recently assessed that they're actually adequate?
So the city's actually undergoing a development impact fee nexus study that we are currently working on in hopes to bring that forward this year to update our fees.
And finally, yes, I would absolutely support. I mean, you're writing a letter, but I think that's an excellent idea because it's pending, it hasn't passed, and that's pretty major. So.
Commissioner Shores?
I might be wrong, but as possibly the only, no, there's maybe one or two renter at this table, I will say, I am absolutely in favor of more housing and more housing in a lot of places of all types of housing. At the same time, I've told members of the council before, I think Burlingame is really blessed to have the land situation that it does in terms of location, infrastructure, so that we have Rollins Road that we can zone out to build all the housing that we want, that we need, that we've been asked to build. And I think there's plenty of room in Burlingame. What seems odd to me about specifically 79 is that it penalizes a city for something that it fundamentally doesn't have control over, which is how things are penciling out. If there's a will for, like they were saying, this could affect so many cities in California. And I feel like, again, we're like the model citizen as far as a city housing plan goes. We've done such an excellent job. It's the housing we've zoned is in excellent places with high amenities. We're already looking at how we can make those neighborhoods better, even before some of those buildings have started renting or leasing. So if we can't meet that bare minimum of permitting that number of low income housing, who can? I don't understand the point of having carrots and sticks for meeting a housing element if the barrier for getting the carrot just doesn't exist anymore and there's only the stick. So that's my major issue, is that it's beyond the fact that, you know, we're getting punished for doing everything that we possibly could as a city to address this. We've done everything the state's asked, but what's the incentive now for us to go through all of this trouble, go through all of these extra plans, the Rollins Road specific plan? What's the incentive for us to do that, to try and focus development, if that's suddenly not enough and the goalposts have moved to an impossible place and now it wasn't for as much as we thought? That's my major concern.
Appreciate the comments. Yes. Schmidt.
But I think that that's where these standards and fees become important. Because if we make it smarter to build in areas that we want housing, like North Rollins Road, we make it pencil better versus areas that we as a community are going to have to pay an enormous amount of money to fund for housing to be there. I think we need to put that onus onto the projects and then they have to make it pencil instead of us taking that beating.
Yeah. Yes.
Actually, I have a question related to that. Can we have different fees for different areas? Like, you know, right now we have impact fees for housing, but if, say, out on the bayfront, someone wants to build housing there, but we know that's an area we don't want it. I mean, it seems like I guess I'm really struggling with the bayfront because I see that as a perfect area as it is for commercial, for recreation. We know it's, you know, the most vulnerable to sea level rise in the city, so we don't necessarily want housing there. But is this another way, like because there would be more impact if we had to start a whole new neighborhood there, could those fees be higher?
Do you want me to take a stab at this?
Well, yeah, why don't you go first and I'll jump in after.
Yes and no. It depends. Some cities have, when development projects have come in, or when they've done specific plans and they've done an economic analysis or assessment, and they've determined a project is not going to pencil for the city, have created community benefit districts or certain type of tax districts in that area to offset the cost of overtime incurred by a city for that area. For example, if an area was intended to be commercial and the balancing of the tax revenue with the infrastructure improvements penciled out, and then it turned into residential, and now it's a sunken cost for the city based on structure and tax revenue, they can offset it with certain types of districts. So yes, and it depends how it all works. These are things and topics that can be explored through a Bayfront specific plan as we do the analysis of what the improvements look like, what sea level rise enforcement, fortification along that looks like, infrastructure needs, things of that nature, and determining economically what's needed to make that area work. And then those regulations get put in place for future development to pay into or buy into as it comes in. Did I do okay?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And first of all, I love to observe that it's not just the lawyers that say it depends. The planners, so appreciate that. To add to the director's response and to respond to your question as well. So any impact fees have to be supported by a nexus study, right? And so that nexus study is the backdrop or is the support for why the agency is imposing the fee and why is the fee set at that particular rate. And so to respond to the question, you know, if we were to impose a nexus study on a particular zone, for example, that would have to be supported by a nexus study that supports why the fee and why the fee is what it's going to pay for, you know, all that sort of stuff. So so the nexus study would absolutely be a necessary part of imposing any new fee for any particular zone or area in the city.
So if I could just play back that, if we commissioned a nexus fee that was so particular to a zone such as the Bayfront and said those costs, variants that we would have as a city are X, even though we might have another zone like North Rollins Road where it's Y, because it has less infrastructure needs, it has less environmental impact, it has less different dimensions, that we can literally set a price point based on that nexus study.
I mean, yes, the thing is that we would have to, you know, that becomes the thing, that goes under the microscope, right? So any developer that wants to challenge those fees would be looking at our nexus study as the basis for why, you know, whether or not they're legitimate. And so we would have to do a really, really, really good job. And even then be expected that there might be challenge to that too. So the sort of the big picture analysis is that, like, we can do it in theory, but there is a certain amount of risk that comes along with it.
But isn't there more risk to not doing it?
So, you know, I mean, that's part of the policy discussion that the council has too.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I mean, just on that letter, like, you know, to me, writing a letter like that is basically saying we're doing the work, you know, here are our concerns, and this is why we can't support this. This is not a letter saying we don't want housing, we don't like housing, we're not pro housing. We actually are. What's happening in Burlingame is we had a community that got behind us and stood behind housing, and they came together and they made it happen. And I fear that in the proverbial Fonzie term, we're about ready to jump the shark. And the state of California is going to push this so hard that you're going to see happen in this state what just happened at the federal government level. And people are going to push back, and they're going to get really upset, and they're going to get really mad, and they're going to deconstruct a bunch of these laws anyways. I mean, that is the ultimate outcome when you just push people to the point where they can't stand it anymore. So I feel like it is responsible for us. We would be very responsible to send a thoughtfully crafted letter. The way it would work would be, the mayor can work on it with the staff and the lawyer, right? And then bring it to the council, and the council approves.
We'll bring in the lawyer last.
Or Lisa.
We need to.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So, yeah, just so for purposes of tonight, since this isn't agendized, right, what we're getting is direction from the council.
To put it on.
Exactly. And so we would need to put this on for an agenda item for the council to vote on, which they can't do tonight. I think we can put a pin in this. I think staff is hearing sort of the direction and the consensus from the council. Lisa and I will put it on a future agenda, very soon to come to you.
It's going to have to go on the first meeting in May. Our packet is done for tomorrow.
It's fine.
No. Okay, I appreciate it. Any other comments regarding, oh yes, Commissioner Say.
Yeah, I was just curious if there's any urgency at looking at design review guidelines or any of our objective standards.
Yeah, that's a
head of everything.
If we could go one slide back. Yeah, part of bringing this as an item is if there's general consensus that, yes, we agree we should prepare for these changes by updating our standards and working on a Bayfront specific plan. I do look to you all for just general consensus that we can work on it. And if this is a priority, as the community development director, I believe it's a priority, but again, council, you are the kind of main director here of, if you believe it's a priority, it would require staff to look at ways to fund something like this, set aside staff time and resources. That does mean some of the things that we have been working on, we do need to kind of drop down to a lower priority level to focus on it. If council and planning commission believe that that's a priority, we can do that. But I raise these as opportunities to, if we believe that we do need to safeguard ourselves or at least prepare ourselves in some way, we should work on these.
And I was just clarification. I know that there are subcommittees that, like our commission has subcommittees that meet occasionally. Could that be a form of aid or assistance, just to have a subcommittee of commissioners?
Absolutely can be. Many other cities have already worked on objective design guidelines. So fortunately, we don't have to start from scratch. There is a lot we could beg, borrow, and steal from what other communities, and maybe a subcommittee could assist in looking at some other communities and things they've done, take a look at our regulations, see what works for us. Maybe it may be some of them just need to be tweaked a little bit, some need to be strengthened, some need to be adjusted. But yes, that will take some staff and if the planning commission is willing, some planning commission time to work on that.
Yes, go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Well, I thought you as a former long-term planning commissioner you were going to say something, but I do want to say something. I think we could help with that because over time, particularly lately, we've been able to establish generally what works. We've been pretty specific about porch depth. We've been pretty specific about plate height. We've been pretty specific about certain items that we can look at again and say, is it a good standard rather than, you know what I mean? That and other things. Also the number of materials that are used, too many materials, or, you know, just simplification of some things. I know I keep them in my head all the time. And many years ago, I think when you were on there was a goal actually to go and assess the projects actually when they were finished, to look at them and go, wow, because it's a big difference when you see something on paper and in real life. How did it actually turn out? And especially with these large ones now, what is working and what isn't? Maybe it isn't working so well that we have these, you know, tiny little, with not a lot of depth, things of color that they're just glued on. Maybe get rid of them all. I mean, maybe just clean it all up. That might be helpful. So I have some thoughts. I'd love to work with some of my colleagues, and so, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I agree. I mean, I guess you know, not to take us down a rabbit hole, but is this basically a backdoor way for the state to just get rid of planning commissions? I mean, it
Yes.
begins to feel like there's,
Zoning.
and yeah, well, and
Cities,
zoning,
local
right.
control.
I don't know how to answer that.
I mean, it's.
I mean, of course you can't really.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab at it. It's, you know, that so these laws are sort of a continuation of a theme that we're seeing from Sacramento, which is the idea is to, you know, get as much housing production out there as fast as possible. And the state has, you know, sees the hearings that have to go, you know, the discretionary approvals that have traditionally been the pathway to get there as the impediments to housing production. And so that's why these laws and, you know, the ones before it have been chipping away at the process that we've all been used to traditionally of discretionary approvals.
Which is why, if I may say so, you can tell there are too many lawyers in Sacramento and not enough business people, because that's not what's holding people back.
Yeah. So any other questions or
One
comments?
last-
Because I think the direction you're looking for is.
Yeah, if we generally, particularly for council, if you generally support this with the understanding it will take funding, finding staff time and resources, putting some other things on the back burner while we focus on this. However, if council believe that's important, we can do so.
May I just ask a quick question? So we have directed staff to no longer pursue the MTC grant for the downtown, the Broadway specific plan. And I think they said we could use that money for something else. Is it possible we could shift that to this specific plan?
We would, what MTC is allowed is us to use it to work through TOC policies in our other areas, which is North Rollins
Okay.
next to the Millbrae and
Okay.
downtown.
So we would have to come up with additional funding for a new specific plan.
Yes, and I think staff we've preliminarily looked at this and have identified possible potential sources we could bring back to council to discuss. But obviously we don't want to do that if there's no appetite for something like this.
I would support it.
Me too.
Me too. Yep. Yep. So I think you have your direction. Is it just a quick question of clarification though? Is that on both, from the council perspective, on both the design standard review and updates as well as the specific plan?
I think
Specific plan.
the specific plan would be the more costly, time-consuming, and needing consultant expert support. We would need to do environmental impact report. That is going to be the larger of the items. The objective design standards, I think in collaboration with Planning Commission, looking at what other cities do, I think it's going to be more staff intensive, but I think we could probably do
Work is normal. Okay.
not work as normal, but that we could use our expertise along with our Planning Commission's expertise and maybe some other resources. A Bayfront specific plan will need to do an RFP, hire consultants, and get people on board to further assist.
Understood. I think that we have the direction.
Public comment,
Any other closing?
or if there's any public comment.
Yeah, that's where I was headed. So public comment, anybody from the public want to raise an issue about the legislative update on housing laws? Seeing none, we will then adjourn and appreciate both staff, commission, and the council and the public for everything. This was a great discussion, very important topics, and we appreciate everybody's focus and involvement. So have a good evening.
Thank you all.